Hello and welcome to episode 306 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. I am the Green Tank, and I'm joined, as always, by Neelan, the Orange Tank.
Hello.
And returning to the show.
To the show? I've never left.
This is my show. Yes, yeah. That's a way to sort of lure patrons in, because if you're a patron, you would have heard a Kellenless but Christina full episode that we just released. So
that's what we're teasing them with now?
Yeah, hell, anything to get a buck. That's my
It's like
philosophy.
an ad-free podcast
Right.
feed, but it's Kellen-free.
Kellen-free,
You just clip me out of all of it.
Pay $5 a
yeah.
month. Pay $5 a month for a Kellen free podcast. But here is a Kellen full podcast where we are going to be talking about how our preferences and tastes in board gaming have maybe changed or evolved over the years. And we were talking about this pre-show, and Kellen brought up a interesting point. Is this like a natural arc of what people sort of go through when they get into the hobby? Is what we're feeling, is how things have changed for us, a natural thing that many people will encounter as they get into the hobby. But before we do that, we're going to be talking about the games that we've played. Kellen is going to start us off with Twinkle Starship. He's taken to calling it, I thought it was originally called Twinkle Starship.
Twinkle Starship.
Yeah, I know nothing about this game, but its title is interesting. I'll follow that up with Pirates of Maracaibo, and finally, Neelan will talk about Skyrise. So, Kellen, Twinkle Twinkle, Little Star.
If you had to say the country that the game was from and what type of game it was, you would be right. 3, 2, 1.
Norway.
Oh, my God. Okay, thank you, Neelan, for playing to the bit. And what type of game is it, Neelan?
It's a small trick-taking card game.
There it is. And I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you both that I had played the game in its former edition, which was called Segment Tricks. But I am not hipster enough. I have only played the new version, Twinkle Twinkle Starship. This comes to us from the Japanese trick-taking master himself, Taiki Shinzawa of Maskmen fame, amongst other things, American Bookshop. Very, very, very good pedigree. This is the real deal, Mark, okay? If you thought you needed a small box game that said Twinkle Twinkle on it, bright green, you should pick it up.
I've never thought that in my life.
Here's the thing. Here's the reasons why it's so good, and I'm going to bury the lead. One, red is always the trump color. Okay? There are other colors in here, Mark. There's almost blue. No, there is blue. There's blue and green. There's no Neelan color. Red is always the trump.
I like it more.
So
red is also always the trump in Cat in the Box, so you are dominating.
Although I should point out the rules clearly say that pink is the trump color. So.
Oh, okay.
I haven't read the rules. Neelan taught me the game. So any problem with these rules, it's Neelan's fault. Though that does sort of give away the fact, Neelan, that you already knew what type. Okay, just wrap that up. But, Mark, have you ever looked at a digital clock?
No,
and there
never.
are the sort of segment lines of numbers like a 4 and a 6 and a 2 and sort of the little pieces of that.
I'm familiar with all the digits.
Oh, all the way from 0 to 9, huh?
Yeah, I got them all locked
You've got them all there. So, in this game, it is a 4-suit trick-taking game where red is always trump. You must follow if you can. And you have these little segment pieces, these little wooden segments that are reminiscent if you've ever seen a digital clock or if you're familiar with the digital numbers from 0 to 9. Those little segments, okay? You start each round with 6 of those segments. And, Mark, are you ready for this? You have to win 6 tricks because you have 6 segments. Do you got that?
So
Red
far,
always
follow.
wins. 6 tricks, 6 segments, Twinkle Twinkle Starship. Okay? But the twist. You ready for it? I'm trying to see how long I can go in this really small thing without doing the hook.
Wait, so this is a trick taker with a twist. This is not like a standard trick taker.
No, it's a hook.
Interesting.
It's
Okay.
a hook.
Did you think that's all there was to the game, Mark?
Yeah,
You
I thought
idiot.
maybe it was just like a aesthetic thing.
Mark, stop
Yes.
talking, okay? The twist is that with your segments, you can simultaneously reduce how many tricks you need to acquire by changing the number of the card that you're playing using the segments.
Okay.
That means that you can turn a 1 into a 7 using one segment. So you literally play the one card, put it out there. Now you need to win 5 tricks, and now you've played a red 7. Okay? You can turn a 3 into an 8 with 2 segments. Okay? Do you understand that, Mark?
I understand.
Do you understand
ever
how
seen
these
the digital
digits work?
clock,
You're the
Mark?
master. 0 to 8 with 1 segment.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Now let me blow your mind here. 6 and 9 are the same card. You don't need a
What?
segment. You just flip the card over. It's the same card. You just play it. You choose. Okay?
Amazing. Okay.
And this could go up or down. Okay, Mark?
Right.
What number, just based off your knowledge of digital clocks and the numbers 0 through 9, what number could go down in Twinkle Twinkle Starship?
Could you go from like a 7 to a 0 with 3 segments?
You could do that.
Can
That's
you
pretty
go from a
good.
7? Can you go from a 7 to a 1 by blocking out a segment or no?
You cannot, no.
Okay.
That is against the rules. There are segments in the rule book that are very cute, like About To is the name of one of the segments in the rule book because you cannot mirror it, Mark. I know what you're thinking. Can
That's
I
the
mirror
first
the
thing I'll
number?
say, yeah.
No, you can't.
You know me too well.
And how the scoring works is you score 2 points per trick that you acquire if you hit your bid.
Okay.
In addition to that, you score for every captured segment that someone else played on a card. So,
Okay.
But if you get rid of all your segments and you score 0 tricks, you score 10 points. So it is very often that someone will get halfway through the round and then suddenly start trying to dump all of their segments by lowering the value of their numbers or playing high numbers when it doesn't matter at all. But then they're giving away points to someone who might be
Acquires
able to
them.
correct.
Okay.
So that's the gimmick. That's the game. That's the hook. That's the twist. You play over 4 rounds. And what I will say is this is adorable and fun and very showy. People, they love the hook. Okay. Let me tell you. Everyone is familiar with digital clocks. So they love the hook. And then second, what's fun is that you play 4 rounds with 4 players. And what you're trying to do in each round can definitely change, because if you get ahead of other players, then suddenly you're fine with net neutral, or you're fine with everybody getting raised. And so often there will be a round where you don't think you can win any points, and so you're going to get 0, but then your goal is to drag everybody down with you. And you've got more power than you normally do in a trick taker, because you've got these segments. Actually, I wonder how this Twinkle Twinkle Starship fits in. Segment tricks
It doesn't
makes
really
a lot
at all.
more sense. Neelan, you read the rule book about the theme, right? What was the theme?
Yeah, it was the starships, right? They're twinkling, and we need to fix our digital clocks to get us.
It's not
back
even
on
in
course.
here. There's nothing
There's
in
no
the upfront.
theme.
About
What?
2. About inversion
About
and 6.
2.
About 7. Absolutely a very fun, cute little game. Neelan, what did you think of Twinkle Twinkle Starship?
It's adorable. I think that there's a lot that you can say just about the fact that it's incredibly simple. Once you've gone past the very basics of a trick taker game, obviously if you have to explain that to someone that doesn't know him, the twist is dead simple. Play the card, change the card using the segments, get the points. It's great. It's neat. I think I was worried, especially because I remember reading the rules and that's not having played the game that weekend, and I was worried that it wasn't necessarily going to be amazing, but I think that the physicality of it and the playing bore out a lot of options, like you said, like whether you're going to sort of burn sticks to lower your bid and help other players, the sort of mutually assured destruction you can go down, or the cooperation if you're with someone, because you can very easily modify your card to help the player next to you if there's any incentive to do that. It's good stuff. There's a lot baked into very little.
The description on BGG is hilarious. Mark, are you ready? Your 6s are 9s. 7s can be 6s, but 2s can only be 8s. Win tricks. How's that for a hook?
Bursting with theme.
That's a Google Translate hook, if I've ever seen one. But I think that it's really hard to evaluate all of these trick takers with a twist. It's like, this is the one you should go out and get. This is the one you should go out and get. I'd love to run down all trick taking all the time, but I don't know that the people are ready for an oops all trick taking episode where we just stack rank everything. This is very cute. I think you would definitely enjoy trying it. But let me ask you this, Mark. What do you do if there's a new member at game night? Okay? And you're busting out the Japanese indie, right? You're hot stuff. You brought
That's right.
segment tricks in this example. I brought
Can't be stopped.
Twinkle Starship. Yeah. And you've got a card bender.
Oh, no.
You know, one of those guys or gals that's sort of just sitting there holding their 10 cards and for no reason at all, just like bending them super hard.
Oh,
what do you do?
I don't know. Can you demonstrate? I know this doesn't help a podcast at all, but I'd like to see, like, can you give me an idea of, like, what kind of bend you're talking about?
When four cards are laid out, one of them is, like, clearly, in a semicircle.
Notably curved on the table.
First play of the game.
gosh.
Literally the
Oh
first
my
play
gosh.
anyone has ever played the game.
Oh, that is brutal. What did you end up doing? Anything?
I did nothing.
Yeah.
I slunk off. I slunk out.
That's annoying.
I didn't have it in me.
Yeah.
But here I am looking at the cards, and some of them are definitely bent. I can tell which ones were in his hand.
That's frustrating.
It's a tough one. I didn't know what to do because it was clear he was like excited to be there, and I didn't want to like disturb the peace. But if it was a more expensive game, there would have been a reckoning.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what it would have looked like.
That's frustrating.
Can you
I would have
not
said, like,
be you?
Yeah.
What would you have said, Mark?
Oh, sorry.
I need a script. I need to repeat after me. Repeat
Sure,
after
sure,
me.
sure.
I'm ready to repeat after you.
I feel like maybe if I had been there, I would have tried to jokingly say, "Oh, hey, do you mind like not bending them? Like, just got it in, trying to keep it in good shape, just like as a jokey thing. Maybe not that verbose.
How is that jokey? Ha ha ha, bro!
Yeah.
Can you not bend my new game?
You.
I don't understand. What part of this is a joke to you, Mark? What's the joke? I don't get the joke.
It's a self-depreciation. Like, oh, it's. Well, I guess it's not a self-depreciation. I don't know what it is. Like, hey, do you mind not bending? I don't know. It's a joke. It's
Bendy
a funny
boy.
thing. It's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. In the moment, you'd have seen how funny it was. Believe
Okay,
me.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have that kind of charisma in
true.
real life. Okay, that was Twinkle, Twinkle, Twinkle Starship by Taiki Shinzawa, one of these little bookshelf games. Very happy to have it and excited to bust it out many more times.
And if you're actually interested in the game and want to look it up, it's only called Twinkle Starship. Just in case people actually want to look it up. Anyhow, speaking of games that we've been playing, I've been playing a bunch of Maracaibo on BGA recently. And after one of the games that I was playing there, Pirates of Maracaibo came to mind, and I wanted to listen back to what my review of it was, now that I have had a bunch of plays of its predecessor under my belt. So I went to our handy-dandy wiki at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki to find out what episode I talked about it on, and then discovered I actually never did cover the game on the show, which was dumb of me. But actually worked out pretty well, because while you don't need to be a fan of the original Maracaibo or even familiar with it to play Pirates, I think if you do know the original, it can inform or maybe even enhance your understanding and appreciation of the newer game Pirates. So pulled Pirates of Maracaibo back off the shelf and gave it another play to refresh myself. So Pirates of Maracaibo, which is a game designed by Alexander Pfister, who of course is the designer of the original game, as well as being co-designed by Ralph Beinert and Ryan Hendrickson. Mr. Hendrickson has experience converting larger games to more quick-playing versions, as he's also a designer of Joan of Arc Draw and Write, which I'm not familiar with, and High Season, which is the new Grand Austria, which I've also recently been playing on BGA and enjoying. This was published by DLP Games, who provided us with a review copy of the game, so I guess I should apologize to them for taking so long to review the game, but like I said, honestly thought I already had. So anyhow, again, I was partially glad that I hadn't reviewed it, because if you're familiar with original Maracaibo, which I now am more familiar with now that I've played it on BGA a bunch of times, there's going to be a lot from the original that will be familiar to you in the Pirates version. Before we get into the meat of the review, a couple of thumbnail encapsulations that I think are sort of helpful when comparing the two. First, if I were to compare Pirates of Maracaibo to the original, I might refer to it or call it Maracaibo the card game. This is a little too reductive, I think, as if it had its own theme, I think most people would think of it as its own fully fleshed out board game, given it has its like own board of sorts, and each player has their own player board. So it's not like just like a deck of cards or anything, but it does play quicker than the original, and there is more focus on cards with it. So the description of it as Maracaibo the card game, I think, is at least somewhat helpful. I'd also say that if you are familiar with Maracaibo, and I promise I'm not going to keep comparing the two so much because I want to review it on its own, but if you are familiar with Maracaibo, you might think of Pirates of Maracaibo as sort of like original Maracaibo, but where the worker placement spots on the rondel are the cards that you would be buying in the original. So replace the spots on the rondel with the cards you buy in the original game, sort of. So just as a sort of like thumbnail idea of it, if you're familiar with the original game. But let's talk about Pirates itself in a little more depth. So I mentioned that this game has a board of sorts. What I mean by that is the board that you and your opponents are going to be sailing their ship pawns on is made up of cards. So it's an array of cards which comprises the main board, which are arranged in columns with another sideboard at the end, which represents your destination, which is Maracaibo, at the end of the columns. On your turn, you're going to move your ship 1 to 3 spaces, moving
Can you
on
keep
those
calling
cards.
it a ship pawn, please? Ship pawn.
You move your ship pawn
Thank you.
1 to 3 spaces, using the cards as the spots you're moving on, and then you're gonna, depending on the card you land on, you're gonna do something on that card, often buying it and adding to your tableau. These cards are gonna do a number of things, but often they're gonna be part of like an engine building aspect to the game. In addition, most cards are gonna give you end of game victory points, but some cards will give you benefits like making future cards cheaper. Some increase the power of your exploration ability. Some increase your combat prowess. So let's talk about exploration and combat, which are two ideas that existed in the original Maracaibo and which are fairly similar in Pirates. When you take the Explorer action in this game, as you did in Maracaibo, you're going to be moving your Explorer pawn. Can I call it the Explorer pawn?
Well, it doesn't sound as good, though.
Okay, this is different than your ship pawn. On a separate exploration board, down a couple of branching paths in order to pick up bonuses, again, very similar to the original game. So that's exploration. It's basically moving up a track and getting victory points or one-time bonuses. If you choose the combat action, again, like in Maracaibo, there isn't really any target or any opponent that you're looking to beat. Rather, you're going to have some amount of combat points that you can spend in different ways, buying victory points, getting money, or buying one of the 3 different gems in the game. And here's another difference between the two games, as the 3 different gem types replace the 3 nations that were in the original game of Maracaibo. More about the gems in a second, but the way that you gain combat points that you're going to be spending is also different. In the original Maracaibo, whenever you did combat, you'd flip a tile, and then based on the nation you're backing, you'd get some number of combat points. In this game, it's die rolling. There is an emerald, gold, and pearl die, which are the 3 gems of the game. You roll them, and then based on the value, you get to spend that many combat points. So if I roll a 4 emerald, 3 gold, 2 pearl, and I select one, say in this case the 4 emerald, I get to spend 4 combat points however I want. The gems have this interesting, simple economic feature to them where when you acquire gems to your own tableau, you're potentially lowering their overall value at the end of the game because you're removing them from the market. It's a very simple, like if you add more gems to the board, it raises the value, but when you actually take them for yourself, it lowers the value. There's also a burying treasure mechanism to go along with the Pirates theme, where after you acquire the gems, you can then further take another action to bury them, which give you even more rewards. A lot of places where you can like gain rewards here and there. There's a lot I haven't talked about, but that's basically the gist of it. If you go to a card and elect to purchase it, as you're going to do often in the game, the card that you buy is taken from the tableau, put into your own tableau, and then replaced with another card, usually a better level 2 card that subsequent players can choose to go on. So you're taking that card off of the shared board and adding a often more advanced card to it. Like in Maracaibo, a round is going to end as soon as one player gets to the end of the track, Maracaibo, which makes Pirates, like the original game, a little bit of a race. You often can't like really lollygag and pick up every card you want because at the risk of other players rushing and grabbing things quicker and rushing the game a bit. And so there's a little bit of a time track element, which listeners will know I'm a big fan of when there's that decision of like rushing ahead versus picking up things at a slower pace. So I very much liked Pirates of Maracaibo, and it's funny because I think that I like it even more now having played Maracaibo, because in getting a chance to play Maracaibo a number of times on BGA, my appreciation for it has grown again. It's a game that I liked in the past when it first came out. I got a chance to play it a couple times, but with other games being available and time being a precious resource, I haven't had a chance to play it very often recently. Getting to play it on BGA has reignited that love of the game, and Pirates of Maracaibo, now that I've played and enjoyed Maracaibo, offers, I think, a lot of what you like in Maracaibo. It's not a rondel, but it's that rondel feeling where getting to the end means something, that race element means something. And there's a lot of interesting branching decisions based on how the cards are dealt on this shared board. But one thing that I didn't really like in Maracaibo, and it depends on how you play, because I think if you're going to play Maracaibo, the original game, like well. You're going to be playing it fast. You're going to be rushing to the end because it's, I think, important in that game to rush to the end. So it doesn't really give you much of a chance in the original game to like build a tableau or buy any cards. If you're playing it well, it's not really too much of a tableau builder. Pirates of Maracaibo like makes that the focus. It makes buying the cool cards, which you do so rarely in original Maracaibo, the feature, the focus of the game. So I really like that. I haven't mentioned that like there's a way to like unlock spots on your own personal shipboard, which gives you passive or immediate benefits as well, which was a feature of the original Maracaibo. So it is in a lot of ways Maracaibo distilled into a sharper, quicker, more intense in some ways experience. I hesitate to say that I enjoy it more than original Maracaibo, but it's close. It just feels a little more concentrated. And I haven't given much thought to the differences between the games and which one I would recommend. But this game plays in, I think, 2/3 of the time of the original game. Again, you get a chance to buy a lot of cool cards, which is always fun. And so, yeah, it's very easy for me to recommend Pirates of Maracaibo, especially for those who like the original game or like Pfister's designs. Like, you do get a little bit of a vibe of Great Western Trail, as you did with, the Maracaibo Great Western Trail comparison is one that's been made plenty of times. So it's like that same sort of, Rondell-esque vibe. So, yeah, that's Pirates of Maracaibo, a game designed by, again, Alexander Pfister, the designer of the original game, and co-designed by Ralph Beinert and Ryan Hendrickson. And again, this was a review copy supplied to us by DLP Games.
I'm pretty intrigued by that description because I was a little bit underwhelmed by Maracaibo, if I'm being honest. Having only played it once, caveat on BGA, not ideal. But there was a lot about, kind of the way that the combat just kind of felt like a glorified point spending system. It kind of felt like a lot of the systems just weren't exciting to me. But I do, similar to how I like the Great Western Trail, I like that loop. And in fact, I like it more in Maracaibo because of that race element. Like the fact that when you get to the end of the loop, everyone now has to rush to like do their stuff, like within a couple of turns. I think that's very cool. That's very clever. An hour shorter, is that what you said? Like, yeah,
I'd say it's about 2/3 of the length. I would say it's probably close to 45 minutes shorter.
Yeah,
it's something in that neighborhood.
I mean, that's great. That sounds like something I ought to try at the very least.
Yeah, and, I will say that it didn't sound like the combat is a huge hurdle for you, but if you don't like the idea of combat being reduced to, like, spending points, you're not going to be...
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get the sense that had changed in a way that would be improved, but, like, I think that I came into Maracaibo with expectations that weren't met, and that is only exacerbated by it being a longer, heavier game as well.
Right,
so,
right, yeah.
Interesting.
I prefer 100% natural juice than anything from concentrate.
I already said that, and that's so you can hop in, unless you want to elaborate on the joke. You have a...
No. Do I have anything to add to that?
Do you want to get into the deep vein of the concentrate
No,
joke?
I don't, actually.
Okay. You sure?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm just going to let that sit.
Because I can always edit it. I can always edit it back,
Edit it back in, make it seem seamless.
I can double it.
Double down. Okay, I am going to be talking about a game that has just shipped out to backers called Skyrise. This is a remake of a 2008 game called Metropolis, spelt with a Y at the end.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'm interested about this. Yeah.
Are there any listeners who weren't alive when Metropolis came out? If so, please email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com.
You're asking
that would be very upsetting.
Listeners that are less than 16. I bet there are.
I'm sure
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is from way back in the day when we were young lads.
But yeah, so Skyrise is Roxley, who are coming off of the success of games like their Brass remake and Brass Birmingham, and they are bringing that sort of elaborate production value and sort of that aesthetic, that sort of cool aesthetic, to Metropolis. It is a dramatically reworked version of the game. By all accounts, there are a lot of changes. I'm not super familiar with all of the changes, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, but I do know enough to know that you cannot play Metropolis with Skyrise. It is quite a change to the original design. The premise of the game is that it is a auction area control game at the highest level. The way it works is you have a number of islands, depending on player counts. Let's say we're playing with 4 players. You have 5 islands, a central island and 4 surrounding islands. Each of those islands is divided into territories of 1 of 4 different colors. When you start a bid on your turn, you're picking one of the territories to place one of your buildings into. You start with a supply of buildings. These buildings are in various heights and have different numbers on them, which represent different bids, all the way from like 1 to 100 and something. You place a building down, And then the next player in turn chooses to either pass, in which case they're out of the auction for the remainder of it, or increase the bid by placing one of their higher buildings on an adjacent territory. So there's this interesting chaining effect that happens that as the auction is progressing, you're moving further and further away from the point of origin. So there's this idea that you are both deciding the direction that the auction is heading, as well as, increasing the bid on it. What you end up winning when you win the auction is the right to place your building in the most recently bid on spot where you place the building, as well as a disc on that territory. The disc is going to increase your scoring with that color of territory. So at the end of the game, if at the start of the game, every yellow territory you build on is worth 2, it might go all the way up to every yellow territory being worth 6 at the end of the game, say. There are a couple of other little discs that give you other various scoring opportunities based on hidden information, a way to double down on discs you're collecting. There's this interesting scoring mechanic where you can kind of shoot the moon, and if you go off the deep end of one scoring color, you could instead transition to just wanting to collect more and more discs of that type rather than caring so much about the territories that you're on. So there's a lot of interesting different angles to scoring. There is a special building that you get in the second half of the game that gives you a special power. And there are scoring cards that relate to your control of specific objectives that are going to vary from game to game. But one of them that's always in play is just per island who has the most tall buildings. You're going to get a certain number of points. So you score the first half, and the second half of the game, whoever has the most points scored over these multiple different scoring conditions is the winner. And that's kind of it. There's not a whole lot to the rules of Skyrise. It is a relatively simple game for how interesting the decisions felt. The thing I described where you're both choosing the direction and your bid kind of gives an interesting twist to auctions where there's also this spatial component to it. If you can build your auction chain into corners, you get a bid effectively trapped where no one can add their bid to an adjacent spot. That effectively ends the bid immediately, which means you can sort of get these 1-2 combos of closing off a territory and immediately placing your lowest bid marker into the closed off territory. And now no one can beat you to it, and you double down. Because one of the things that's cool about the tempo of that is when you win an auction, you immediately start the next one. So there's a lot of cool chaining and positional stuff that becomes more and more pressing as the game continues because the board's just getting more and more restrictive. It's a very, very interesting dynamic, a lot to think about at every point in the game. Kellen, you also played Skyrise with me. What did you think about it?
So I think it's important to celebrate when something feels novel, even after being in the hobby for so long. And the combination of auctions by way of area control does feel really pronounced and weird because an auction will start for one territory that you maybe kind of want to win, and then next thing you know, it's 3 squares away and it comes back to you and you can bid again, but you're not bidding on the spot that you wanted. You're bidding on a spot 4 spots away. So that sort of movement in some ways feels kind of Genoa-esque to me, and then also Estates is probably the closest game to this for whatever that's worth, but this is much Eurified in terms of all of the scores will score, you'll get a lot of points and you'll upgrade a lot of your upgrades. I want to like this. It's funny, this is not something I say that often. I want to like this more than I do right now, and I'm willing to play it again. I felt like the first phase of the game was quite great and felt open, and it felt like I was making choices, and then the second half of the game felt like people were getting because of just where the auctions were happening or what tiles were even available. And there's more control over that, and there's a little bit of get good in there, but there's definitely some like I said to you afterwards, it feels like an old game that has been Eurified, for better or for worse.
Totally. And this is one of those times where I felt very curious to know what the original game was like, because it does have this sense that there is a pure heart to this that is really, really good. And I want to sort of actually, before I even go any further, I want to say I really like Skyrise. I think it's quite good, but I do think that I can get to the heart of what Kellen's issue with it is, which is it does feel like there's stuff bolted onto a very, very cool idea. And then the question I always ask myself in that situation is, do we need the stuff? Or is there a purer version of this game that is 90% of what I love about it?
One of the changes, right, is that there are 2 phases now, and you don't have access to all your bidding mechanisms until the second half of the game. So you can't pull a bus, right, and use all your stuff at the beginning. And continuing in the tradition of me reading BGG reviews because I love them, here is a excerpt from a BGG review from Weirdest, the game is split into 2 parts like brass. The designers have explicitly stated that this isn't for any strategic reason, just to avoid the quote-unquote problem of incompetent new players blowing all their high bids early. An infuriating solution for a problem better resolved by a mechanism I call playing better in the second game.
That is pretty funny. I can see both sides of that. I am very curious to say you could just probably play Skyrise without the first phase, honestly. Like, you would get closer probably to the original idea. So yeah, that is interesting. I wonder if you just remove that mechanic as just like a, what's the word that you always like to use, Callan? Like a safety belt almost?
Yeah,
guardrails?
Bumpers on a game of bowling. It is, I mean, again, this is, designed for the modern era. This is also, it triggered something in me, and not to be, again, I want to play this again. I will play this again with Neelan. I'm happy that Neelan owns this. It triggered something in me. The board is made of plastic. And it's weirder than, like, the pieces are plastic. It's like we've gone back to, like, Fisher-Price land, and we're all 5-year-olds playing with plastic. There's something...
I should mention we're talking about the deluxe version here, which is, yes.
Oh, you paid extra to be a child again.
Unfortunately. In a realm, I don't really ever do that anymore. This was one where I maybe regretted that a little bit. It's a lovely deluxe version. It's very silly. Yeah, you have these raised plastic boards that represent the Sky City that feel very unnecessary.
Mark, they only go back in the box in one way, okay?
One specific order.
And rather than, having an extra rule book for how to do that, they're like printed on the back. Like, This one has to go in third.
Right. I mean,
how does that make you feel? Are you enraged?
Honestly, I do. Okay,
Mark?
I'm half enraged because
okay,
I do appreciate when there are how to put stuff back in instructions, because I don't know what it is about me, but whenever there's like, we're playing a game with miniatures and like you have to like figure out based on the mold which miniature, like, okay, is it the guy with the axe because there's a space that looks like an axe? No, it's the guy with the cane because that's where the cane goes and you got to flip him on his side. So I hate that. So if there's something to help that, I'm always there for it. However, I'll say that I only played Metropolis once, way back when, so I don't even remember the rules. I remember liking it quite a bit, and I remember liking how simple it was. And I was looking forward, and I still am looking forward to playing this. You guys have sold me on at least trying it. But I do remember thinking it was like one of those, again, dusty old Euros where this rule set was really simple, and it was very easy to figure out what the basic strategy was, and you could like focus all your brain power on how to play it rather than remembering rules. And so it sounds like that's mostly there here, but to hear that there is a lot of maybe setup and teardown in a game that was otherwise sold on its simplicity is a little bit of a bummer, but I am still excited to play it for sure.
Yeah, it's a very light teach,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Oh, the teaching. I can't say the teach, so take that out.
Yeah,
But, like,
it definitely
it's not
hits
bad.
that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It hits that. You will be surprised by how easy it is, for the most part, to explain for the depth that seems to be there, at least to me. Yeah, I don't think you would go wrong with just the basic version of this, though. I don't think you need to at all go in on any deluxe version. And it's especially welcome in a world where Metropolis is obviously very hard to come by. Glad that this exists.
Yeah.
That's Skyrise by Roxley Games.
Before we go on to our discussion about how our tastes and preferences in board gaming has evolved over the years, I just want to check back in on something I mentioned in the midsection of our last mainline podcast, which was boardgamebarrage.com/map. It is map, right? I can't remember if it's map or maps. Map. Yeah. boardgamebarrage.com/map, where if you're interested in finding local players who are also listeners to BGB, you can go to that website, fill out a form, and then you can go to a link of our listener map where people who are also interested in getting games together represent our map. And I'm happy to report that the map has filled out quite a bit. A lot of the spots that were empty before now have a little indicator. So we have Hawaii on the board. I was hoping that we would get some of the Eastern Australia, and I'm happy to report that we have Brisbane, Sydney, and I want to apologize to all the listeners in Melbourne. when I called it Melbourne, but I know it's referred to as Melbourne, so Melbourne's there. We have got China on the board. Happy to see that. Some Japan on there. We've got France and Germany now represented, so very, very excited about that. Still no Africa, so hoping we get a spot on Africa before too long. But yeah, if you're interested in finding other BGB listeners and getting games with them, go to boardgamebarrage.com/map. And again, you don't have to put in any specific information, just the city you're in, and potentially find other folks to play games with. So thanks to everyone who filled that out. All right, so let's move on to our feature topic, the evolution in our board gaming tastes. So we've touched on this here and there throughout the years. Of course, it's just natural in the course of talking about games for over 300 episodes as we've done. We've talked about how our expectations and our preferences and what we like and how we play games have changed over the years, but we wanted to sort of maybe make it the focus of an episode in order to crystallize what those changes have been. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, talk about is the feelings that we've gone through and the changes that have occurred to our gaming habits and gaming preferences. Are these some things that just naturally happen to most folks who are entering or who are in the board gaming hobby? So perhaps a nice entry point to getting this conversation going is I'm looking at boardgamebarrage.com/about, where we wrote descriptions of ourselves when we very, very first started the podcast. And so let's go over what those descriptions were and maybe talk about maybe how they have changed. So I'll start with you, Neelan. So your description on boardgamebarrage.com/about says, Neelan, the orange tank. He loves Euro games with a strong puzzle element, but also negotiation and social deduction games. His favorite games include The Resistance, A Feast for Odin, and Gloomhaven. So
yeah, I think that's interesting because I think there are elements of this. Obviously, they are still the same. Like I wouldn't have expected my taste to change entirely, but like the strong puzzle element is still the thing I gravitate probably to the most. But I don't necessarily identify as like loving Euro games anymore. Like if anything, one of the things I sort of noticed most about my taste is it's kind of Kellenified over time.
Oh no!
And I think
oh no!
I think that there's like something to be said. I think there's something to be said that's probably true to all of us to some extent. Where every time anyone
you're saying I've been Kellenified?
No,
that's right.
Not Kellenified, not Kellenified specifically.
Ring the bell.
But anytime you talk about a game with any enthusiasm, it gets you excited to like broaden your taste a little bit. Like I think there's a whole host of games I would never have tried without Mark's infectious enthusiasm about, for example, train adjacent games. There's a lot of those that I've tried in the interim. Economic games as well is also just not something that I would have had much interest without Mark's enthusiasm for. I would never have both discovered how much I dislike trick-taking games and then completely turned the corner on liking trick-taking games without Kellen, for example. It's interesting just kind of like how also I would say that my taste is maybe skewed slightly away from social deduction, which is to say that I tried a lot of social deduction games in the interim time, burned out on a lot of them, and kind of circled back to what is, in my opinion, like the social deduction game, which is Blood in the Clock Tower. And I've also kind of embraced just liking slightly lighter, more medium weight games with more interaction in them. I think that's kind of closer to what I'm looking for most of the time now.
That feels like, and not to say you're following the trend because like we're all obviously different, but I do feel like one of the common things you hear is that people start with the Ticket to Rides, the Catans, the Dominions, and then they ramp into this crazy complexity thing where they kickstart 200 things and they're like reading every new Lacerda rule book, and then it like cools to some degree.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I don't know what this says, but that feels to me like a natural arc, which is your first few years in a hobby is exploring the breadth of it into both extremes, right? Which is like you're going to try the heaviest stuff you can, and you're probably going to sort of just be like, okay, I've done that, I've tried a lot of that, now I'm going to sort of settle into what is a more comfortable place for me.
All right, next victim, Kellen the Red Tank, again, per bgb.com/about. Kellen the Red Tank, he's a social gamer who often prefers mean and interactive games where you have to fight your opponents to win. His favorite games include Innovation, Cosmic Encounter, and Cthulhu Wars.
Wow. I'm just
Rocksteady.
A beacon of... Yeah, exactly.
Changed.
I do think perhaps one of the biggest changes for me is my like pure love of just like you player interaction has diminished to some degree. I remember my want to Like the last time we all played Diplomacy, I was having a crisis of faith because Mark, he tried to form this counter-insurrection against me. He thought that would be hilarious. And I saw it immediately, right? We crushed him. He was out. But I didn't feel good about it as I did in years past because I knew the game is so spiky in terms of like what someone gets out of it. And so it's like, I don't know, like the sort of everyone having fun has become more of the goal even within the framework of these sort of more interactive games.
And all it took was looking at me with my big eyes welling up with tears for you to realize the error of your ways.
It's like, exactly. No, it's like, I still love a lot of player interaction, and I love the sort of strategies being derived from what the other players are doing and not like these crazy complicated mechanisms. But it's like just the straight sort of take that, I fight you, unless the whole game is baked around that in a specific way. I will play a game and I'll be like, we're playing a Euro game. Why the hell is this in here?
Yeah.
Like I can appreciate a Euro game without the I attack you for 7 health card.
Right.
That you're just like, why is this in this deck of cards?
Whereas in the past, you might be more okay with that.
Yeah, I would just say turn that up. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
And I don't know if social gamer is even how I would self-identify. I don't know if that's like marketing, because I like marketing. That's what I do for my day job, marketing. That's how I came up with Twinkle 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 Starship. But I would say that it's probably closer to like light gamers, or like I would say just like light to media. And again, what light to hobbyists, right? Yeah. Means like really middleweight. So
medium heavy, yeah.
So I would say that like in the context of hobby gamers, I prefer light games. I might add card games explicitly to this as something that I prefer. But I also find myself right now in a weird state where I feel like I rode a little wave of like indie Japanese small box card games, and now like that market is much larger, and so there's bigger communities of people that are like looking for those games, and I find myself having less fun, or I care less about like tracking them down than I used to. I was talking to Mike Delisio about it, and he sort of said it's sort of like the thrill of the hunt of like, kind of like it used to be with music or like indie records, like you could only get stuff here. And I just no longer have that feeling. And this is even in the last like year and a half. I'm still like looking for those games. I still like those games, but I'm not paying $70 to import one, or getting like amped up and excited when I could run to it at Gen Con to like snatch it before someone else does. There's just so many other games and so many other things that, I'm just not sure.
Okay, so and I'll go over myself here. Mark the Green Tank, he's an Omni gamer, enjoying everything from light party and card games to ultra heavy economic and 18xx trading games. Favorite game is Biblios, the greatest game of all time. That still holds up. Also likes Arboretum, Question of Scruples, and 1830. It's sort of hard to talk about mine because mine is sort of like all-encompassing, the whole Omni gamer things. I still feel like I do enjoy the spectrum, but I think that's probably true of all of us to some extent. We all are happy to at least dip our toes in heavier stuff and then also play the lighter stuff. I will say that in terms of the heavy side of things, I still feel like that's a substantial itch when it comes to like board gaming. Like when it comes to what I want out of board gaming, the heavy, full of decision aspect to it is still fundamental to me. And that has sort of gone in two ways. One, it's been like an appreciation of those older Euros or games that are built in that same mold where it's like a low rule set, but a lot of decisions. So that brain power that I want to burn is now being burnt in the rule set is very simple, and now you can spend all that focus on what you want to do and scratching that itch in that way, and sort of lessen like the complicated rule sets. Although I still like the games that have a lot of gears, a lot of things that are complicated, but I find that focus, or the way that I scratch that itch, to keep the analogy going, is in a new respect for solo gaming. So, like, there's a lot of reasons why I want heavier, complicated games, but also a lot of reasons why they're hard to play. It feels bad to, like, in some cases, I feel like I'm foisting these like very big rules explanations on people who maybe don't want them. And also, it's obviously, if we're going to play a heavy, long game, that's like our entire game night. So, I'm sort of reticent to ask people to devote their entire game night to one complicated game that they might not want to play. And if they don't like it early on, or if they lose focus early on, that's like ruins their entire game night. So in an effort, I think, and this wasn't like a thing I thought out or I planned to do, but after like playing games like Mr. President, which is a super, super, super long game, which takes like literally days, but it does scratch that super complicated, full of decisions itch that I like, but I don't have to ask anybody to do that. I can sort of like set it up, play it at my pace, if there's any rules burden, I just take it on myself. I don't have to worry about, lumping it onto anybody else. So that's one thing that's definitely changed about the way I play games. When we first started this podcast, I was not at all into the idea of solo games or playing solo games at all. And now I found it to be my outlet for those heavier, longer games when possible.
It's like I now feel some sense of like parody when I see people playing heavy games. I don't know if you guys feel this at all, but it's like I saw at the last game night I was at, Marrakesh was set up on one table, and then a Lacerda game, Kanban EV, was on another. And I own Marrakesh, just to be clear. This is not me like completely making fun of all this. Like I want to play Marrakesh, but I just was like watching them set it up, learn the rules, move all these pieces, and we played like 4 card games in the intervening time while this was happening, and I just was like, it felt like I was watching a parody of board gaming.
Yeah, I get that, and I've, as I've sort of said, like I've become more amenable to like the wanting to play 4 shorter games that might again give you a lot of brain burning in a different way. But if the heavier games weren't an option, like if I couldn't play like the longer 2-hour, 3-hour games that I feel like you have to really dig into, I think it would lower my desire to play board games or my like wanting to be in the hobby to some extent, because part of the allure to board gaming to me, there's the social aspect, there's like the having fun with your friends aspect, there's all that stuff, there's the competition side to it that I like a lot, but part of it is the like, okay, these are the rules. It may be long rules, it may be something that's really intricate, it's a very finely tuned difficult puzzle. Like there's something about those really heavy games that, although, again, I found an outlet in different ways, there's still something about that is important to the hobby for me. That outlet is still an important part of things.
Yeah, I wrestle with that specific thing a lot, which is that I find myself much less willing to frequently engage in a heavier or longer game. And like I think one of the examples that comes to me most recently is Nucleum, which is a game that I have been told by multiple people that I absolutely should try. It is reminiscent of Brass, one of my favorite games. But every time the opportunity comes up, and I'm like, do I want to learn a 3-hour game that's really, really heavy? It does feel very daunting, and in a way that it didn't always in the past. And it's something that scares me a little bit. Not to say that I would never do that. Like I like Mark. I still feel like, no, this is a thing I need to do sometimes. But like I find that the setting for that becomes much more important and much rarefied these days. But there is this thing I was thinking about the other day with my top 50, where I don't know that a game like Through the Ages could enter my top 10 unless it was something incredibly special that I was able to play over and over again, because I played that very early in my discovering the hobby. So I had this familiarity that sort of came from sort of early repeated plays and then playing it a lot digitally and wanting to play it more and more over the course of a very, very long period of time. We're talking like 10 years here. But could a game like Nucleum like ever enter my top 10 now? Like it would be very hard to imagine I would play it enough times for that to be true anymore.
Yeah. And as part of that is like just the proliferation of
exactly.
games. With so many games coming out, for a game to really stand out, especially, and when a game is longer, it I think justifiably requires more for it to like be worth your time, because there's so many games and there's a lot of iteration on ideas. So like a lot of things sort of get mucked up together. And
exactly.
Yeah,
and I think that's the key thing. Unless it's doing something incredibly novel or different that becomes apparent within a couple of games.
Yeah.
If it does just feel like, well, here we mashed up a little bit of Brass and a little bit of Barrage together and we ended up with Nucleum, that is going to be a harder thing to stick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that similar to television shows in the, it's funny because it's probably worse before we were born, but, my parents talk of there being 3 channels and everybody watched, Happy Days together. Insert other old person reference that I can't come up with. And, then when we get to my high school experience, everyone was watching like Lost and The Office.
Yeah.
And, we still have some of those cultural touch points in modern television watching, but they're getting fewer and far between with things like Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, I would say.
That's a great point.
Is that what's happened to board gaming, Mark, since in the last 10 years?
It's funny that you bring up television because as we're talking about this, I was trying to figure out, as someone who's not plugged into like the video game world, is there an analogy in that world as far as like maybe the proliferation of video games? Is there a similar thing going on in that culture?
Very much, very, very much. I'm going to keep this brief because it's a tangent, but like you only have to look at like the top 10 games on Steam to see that it is mostly older games. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because it is very hard with how wide the market is now for a new game to get as much widespread adoption by multiple demographics and multiple people at the same time to break out. And like there are only a handful of recent examples where that's even the case. Like this year, I think Helldivers is one of the few that's broken like that cultural phenomenon barrier.
Yeah, so then it becomes like a interesting question, right? If it's about filtering and your ability to filter it, then there is ultimately not much difference between the 27 Euro games that you've tried in the last 2 years, and like it's only on like a 5-year spectrum that you could actually observe the differentiation or find like a standout. And like that's weird for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something I wrestle with because I think the old way that I had of looking at things is correct, where like I was sort of less inclined to be into the latest Kickstarter and stuff like that because I figured let the market figure things out, and then 5 years from now I will look back to see the games that are holding steady, and those will be the games that now I go out and trade for or buy or whatever. And I think that's, probably even more true nowadays, again, given the glut of games. Like you should allow for the market or people you like to listen to, like people like us or other podcasts or other reviewers, let them filter the wheat from the chaff for you, and then go and pick out the games that have been tested rather than just going with the hot stuff. But then I'm sort of torn because I was in a game shop recently, and there's so many new games, and you look at all these games and you're like, what makes this different than this? You look at the back of the box, trying to figure out like, is this another Euro? And then I found myself just being attracted to the shinier things, and it's just like, because everything is gray now, it just takes a little bit of shine here or there to make me like look at it or interested. And then I look at the back and I realize, okay, this is probably just like another Euro that I don't really need to jump on. But like there is like the contradiction of, because there's so much, a little bit of shine makes something stand out superficially. So it's something that I wrestle with. And obviously as a reviewer, as we're reviewers, we sort of are compelled a little bit to try the newest stuff out. But yeah, it's difficult.
It's funny because I have that sort of that exact point on my list and I don't know if you're implying it as a negative, which is to say that I do think that as the market has grown, there is this, I find this appeal in like, okay, what are the other things about this hobby that can be appealing? And aesthetics do actually matter a lot more and more to me. Yeah. I feel like I was maybe always the person that was more drawn to the way that the thing looks and feels. Maybe that's not right, but like I find more and more that I appreciate that. Skyrise is maybe a poor example because that's off the deep end, but there is something to a lavish production, one that feels good and just kind of looks great on a table, that really does appeal now, because it is a way to make a game stand out from the crowd. And if that's obviously married with a really strong design, then that's just great. I think that is like, a lot of the appeal across the board of something like Brass Birmingham, where you have a solid game that just looks gorgeous. I think that makes a massive difference to like how I, to some extent, like you said, Mark, discover games, but also how I evaluate games. Whereas it's like, oh, I want to hang on to this because it has appeal. It has like table appeal. And
that's to your exact point. I think that early on, I would have identified myself as the person in this podcast who was like least into like the aesthetic. Like there's some part of me that thinks that early in the podcast, I would have been the guy who's like, I don't care what it looks like. Let it be like just like sticks and circles and dots or whatever. And if it's a good design, I'll like it. And I can tell you, like, that is not as much at all the case for me nowadays. There are times where I will learn or hear that a game is like really good, but it's like an indie design or something like that, and then I'll look at it and the production is just really low, and it'll turn me off, which is something that has changed dramatically for me. I don't need, and I think to your point, there are cases where it goes off the deep end and it becomes like, now it's a turn off. But I find that if games don't meet like a certain aesthetic visual bar, that the gameplay itself is no longer enough to make me interested.
Yeah, I don't know about this one, guys. I feel like we're in opposite land here for me, which is like I enjoy, I guess, having a nice game because that reduces the friction of getting other people willing to try it. Like, come look at this, it's pretty. But like, I'd much rather just have the game have like no friction by way of, we could start this game in 35 seconds and here we go with no rules and, a piece of paper. I think that, one of the things I had written down is that like, owning board games no longer triggers the same feeling I get about wanting to own other objects. And this isn't just a like I like board games less thing. It's like when I think about music, it used to be on iTunes that I would, every time I bought a song for first I was pirating them. Okay, I'm going to be honest here. LimeWire, Napster, Kazaa, I was there. Okay. Then iTunes made it, 99 cents, but like curating my music collection was a thing in this era. Buying 99 cents, I was burning my friends' CDs, and like there was this sort of like I was excited to buy the new album that came out so that I could put it on my iPod and have a collection. I still feel that way, funnily enough, about like Pokemon cards or maybe video game memorabilia, but I do not feel that in the slightest about board games at all. And it kind of felt pronounced when Neil and I were talking about Skyrise, because he was, and Christina was also very excited about like the buildings and the, the paint wash on it and like how it all fit in the box together. And like, I just like, my eyes were sort of rolling, in the back of my head. I don't get the same collection I love that I maybe once did at the beginning of this.
And why do you think that is? What has changed that?
I think that there are just too many board games coming out, and like the publishers don't even believe in the longevity of their product. That's the really, really cynical thing. I mean, I also have just, if I had played 300 games when we started this, I've now played, 2,000. Yeah. Again, I'm making up numbers. I have no way of knowing that because I wouldn't use BG stats, but just death by, the novelty goes away.
Yeah.
But again, the sort of like, I have to protect my game and sleeve it, and like this is the most important thing. Like it just, and again, I don't even think this is like an evolved position.
Yeah.
I think I might be better off with like 100 games that I really cared about and it upgraded every component and really cared about it. But I just like, I don't know. I don't have that instinct anymore. It's gone away. Death by overexposure.
Yeah, I've definitely like similarly lost the acquiral, is that the word? That instinct a lot, where I feel less inclined to. I was always the person that if I had heard multiple people say like, "Oh, this is a good game," I would be looking for it like online the next day, like, and I curb that thought a lot these days because I feel like I'm just getting less and less satisfied with playing 4 games and finding one of them to be, worthwhile. And I don't even mean like good enough to keep. I mean like that was worth me buying and acquiring and learning and playing. And like I do think I sort of lean now closer a little bit to a Kellen or a Mark position where it's like, okay, no, just wait a little bit. Like you'll find out in the long tail whether this is actually worth going out to get. I like getting caught up in the excitement of things, and there are still things that I will do that for. There are still Kickstarters that I will look at and, just take a flyer on. But like, it's getting less and less likely that I will do that, and it's just because it's the same sort of instinct that Kellen described. It's the acquiring of board games is less important than the curating of them.
My position on this is something I'm wrestling with. I mean, I think I haven't changed too much. Early on, one of the first things I talked about on this podcast back in like, I think maybe episode 2, I think it was, we were talking about math trading and trading in general. And, back then I sort of saw games as boxes of fun and like sort of commodities in that way. I will trade any game, anytime because I just think that I'll get joy from something else. And the trading, the hunt, the figuring out good deals, all that kind of stuff is something I take a lot of joy in. And that is still very much the case. I still make trades. I mean, it probably make trades more nowadays than ever. And so I do still see the games as commodities, but to go along with what I talked about earlier with where games are, because there's so many of them and there's a lot of gray to them. There's a lot of like similarity. When it comes to making a trade, it's hard for me to really get excited about a trade because what am I trading for? I'm trading for a game that is like very similar to that game or like, so I still like the collecting aspect of it. I've wrestled with like, I do have too many games, that's for sure. But that part of it is not a burden to me. Like I'm not bummed out by the number of games. I think I should slim them down, but I still feel like the collection part of it is still a joy to me because I just like to have this collection. I like the colorfulness of like having the games displayed. I like having the theoretical options to play all these games. Again, for me, games that are unplayed are like just potential boxes of fun in the future. But that whole trading thing, which again, I'm doing more than ever, definitely. Some of the shine has been taken off with like the number of samey games out there. So I find myself trading for like really hard to get games or games that, are older games, again, that are difficult to acquire in like the retail market. And so that's where I sort of get the fun of the trading aspect to it. But in terms of like the way I acquired or the volume to which I acquire games, I think that pretty much has stayed for the most part the same where I'm just like not getting caught up in the current Kickstarter stuff, letting things sit, seeing how things filter out for the most part, and getting games in that way. So I think in some ways things haven't changed too much, but in other ways, the way I've been doing the acquisition and the trading has changed.
Like, Mark, if you could take all of your games and forever they fit only in your one game bag,
yeah,
but every game fits into that game bag, and you can never display them again.
Right.
All your games fit in one Mary Poppins bag.
Okay.
You would do that, right?
The option is keep things as is or have everything like in a little
one
bag.
Mary Poppins bag, but you can never display them.
I don't think I would do that.
Oh my God. Are you kidding me right now?
I don't
We're breaking the rules of the universe. Mary Poppins?
I mean, I would love the Mary Poppins bag to use for other things.
Oh,
but
yeah,
like,
you're not going to make money with the bag, Mark. It's just a trade here.
No, I want to use it as a storage thing. I'll charge people to store their stuff in my Mary Poppins
Yeah.
bag. But no, I mean, like, then what are we... That's less...
What are we doing?
It's less...
We're playing board games.
less fun,
You have
though.
a bag. You have all the board games wherever you want to go. You're Mary Poppins
Part of the
of board games.
So what am I going to put on my walls? What am I going to put on all these calyxes?
Oh
I got
my
to toss all the
God.
calyxes
I will
out?
say
You're
that
going to have a beautiful house.
Mark is in one of the most unique positions of having like what feels like a library of board games in his apartment, which I also feel like that feels special to me. Like I love the idea of running up and down Mark's stairs, looking at all of his shelves. Like
Yeah, this guy's
it's
got
neat.
3 floors of board games.
Yeah, that's
everywhere
great.
you go.
That's
What?
fun.
Oh my God! I thought
I
I thought I was
want
not
that for
designing a
myself?
hot question.
No, but like
Yeah.
I love that exists.
For
I love
Mark,
that Mark's
yeah.
curating it. Yeah, exactly.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like I don't know. The board games, like yes, they are taking up space, and theoretically the space could be used like better, or it could offer us like open up room for other things. But like the games add so much color and so much promise of fun.
Yeah,
this is
well,
a
that's
fun
the thing.
place.
There's like a Willy Wonka-ness to
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
just like running around the board game store.
Yeah,
You know?
you have that in your bag.
No, but that's
wherever you go,
stupid.
you are the fun, Mark.
It's like I promise, if you look in this bag, like I could pull
what is
anything.
you're not like
That's
putting
dumb.
people in the bag, Mark?
That's how we get the games out, right? We got to go in the bag.
Oh my God!
No.
Let's ask Roselle this question.
Yeah.
Oh my God! I just tried to give you the sweetest deal of all time, and you rejected it.
That's funny. That's interesting. It's interesting that you found that my answer is so unlike what you thought it was going to be. Because for me, like when you offer that initially, I'm like, oh yeah, having all this space sounds great. But then I think of my place without all the colors and all like the different themes and stuff like that. It just seems so much more boring. I don't know.
I can't believe it.
Okay, so that's going to do it for the topic, and that's going to do it for the show. As always, go to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and go to the podcast channel and maybe talk about how your own preferences and gaming habits and style of gaming and so all that stuff has changed. I'd be interested to see if the things that we've been going through are mirrored by our listeners. So please go ahead and do that. While you're going to Barrage-related links. Again, you can go to boardgamebarrage.com/map and put your city on the map, especially if you're in Africa. I'd love to see African representation.
Come on, South African.
Yeah,
One
come
person
on.
in South
Nealon's
Africa.
countrymen.
Good
Please.
Lord.
So go to boardgamebarrage.com/map to do that. Again, you can find us on all forms of social media. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Thank you to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I forgot my bye.
What's on your mind, kid?